She had only taken 3 steps toward the gate when it happened. The crowd was restless, the line was long, and people were desperate to board. And then, out of nowhere, the sound of tearing paper sliced through the air. It wasn't just any paper, it was her passport. Passengers froze, some gasped, some whispered, and others raised their phones to record what they couldn't believe they had just seen. A woman, calm, neatly dressed, standing with quiet dignity, had just had her passport ripped in half by the very man who was supposed to let her through. The gate agent, Mark Reynolds, clenched the shredded booklet in his hand like a trophy. His voice carried across the terminal. "You're not flying anywhere today." It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. And for the woman standing there, Dr. Angela Carter, the humiliation was immediate. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't caused a scene, hadn't even challenged the endless line of passengers ahead of her. She had only walked forward when it was her turn. Yet in that moment, her identity, her very right to exist in that space, was torn in half along with the pages of her passport. The crowd buzzed, confused. Some stared at Angela like she must have done something wrong. Others looked at the agent, shocked that anyone would go this far. But only a handful noticed the way Angela's hand stayed steady at her side, her gaze unwavering, her jaw locked tight. Because what no one in that terminal understood, not even the furious agent gripping those paper shreds, was that Angela Carter was not just another traveler. She wasn't powerless. She wasn't ordinary. She carried with her a responsibility that reached far beyond that gate, far beyond that airport, far beyond even the city of Atlanta. But she said nothing. Not yet. Instead, she lowered her eyes for a moment and breathed. And as she exhaled, her right hand tightened around a sealed envelope tucked beneath her coat. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. Most people wouldn't have cared. But that envelope carried a weight that could bring airlines to their knees, ground fleets, and end careers in a single stroke. And still, no one in that terminal knew who she was. Not the passengers, not the airline staff, not even the police officer who had just begun walking toward her. They only knew what they thought they saw, a black woman, standing alone, being humiliated at a gate where power and privilege spoke louder than dignity. The gate agent smirked, his words cutting the silence. "People like you don't belong here." But even as his words burned through the air, the truth about Angela Carter was waiting, like a storm on the horizon, and when it broke, every soul in that terminal would remember her name. Now pause for a moment. If you had been standing in that terminal, watching a woman's passport ripped apart for no reason, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up? Would you have stayed silent? Hit the subscribe button now and drop your answer in the comments, because this story is only just beginning. Angela didn't answer, not to the jeers, not to the insult, not even to the sound of her own identity being torn apart. She stood still, steady, her chest rising slowly as though the entire terminal had pressed pause around her. And for a moment, it was silence that spoke louder than anything she could have said. Passengers shifted uneasily. A mother pulled her child closer. A businessman in a tailored suit muttered under his breath, "She must have done something." And yet, no one could point to what. No one had seen her raise her voice, cut the line, or break a rule. Her crime was invisible, and yet her punishment was public. Angela's eyes flicked toward the boarding sign above the gate, Flight 223, Atlanta to Washington, D.C. Only she knew how important that flight was, not just for her, but for the nation. Because if she didn't make it to Washington that night, secrets that had been buried for months would remain hidden, and perhaps thousands of lives would be at risk. She pressed her fingers against the envelope under her coat. The paper was thick, official, stamped with red lettering that read, "Confidential." No one else knew it existed. No one else knew that inside were documents powerful enough to cripple entire airline companies. But to the passengers watching, she was just another woman without a passport. Mark Reynolds, the gate agent, leaned closer, enjoying every second of her silence. He mistook it for weakness. "What's the matter?" "Nothing to say now. That's what I thought." Angela didn't flinch. In her mind, she whispered, "Not today. Not again." She had seen this before. She had endured this before. And once upon a time, she might have lowered her head, apologized for something she never did, and walked away quietly just to survive. But not anymore. The officer approached slowly, his hand brushing against the radio on his chest. He looked uncertain, as though waiting for the gate agent's signal, and the crowd leaned forward with anticipation, their phones lifted higher, hungry to capture whatever came next. A young woman in the crowd whispered to her boyfriend, "She doesn't deserve this." But her voice was drowned out by others, muttering, laughing, shaking their heads as though Angela's silence was proof of guilt. The weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders. Not just the humiliation, not just the injustice, but the knowledge that her mission, the investigation she had spent months building, could collapse in a single moment of exposure. Should she speak now? Should she reveal who she really was? Should she risk blowing her cover just to escape this insult? Her heart told her no. Her mission demanded silence. And so she kept her lips sealed, her eyes calm, and her grip firm on the envelope hidden beneath her coat. But silence has a way of speaking louder than words, and in that airport terminal, her quiet defiance was beginning to stir something in the air. Passengers shifted, uncertain, uncomfortable. The gate agent sneered, mistaking her restraint for surrender. What he didn't know was that Angela Carter was calculating every second, every move, every possible consequence. She wasn't frozen. She was waiting for the right moment. And when it came, the entire balance of power in that terminal would shift in an instant. If you were Angela, humiliated in front of hundreds with your future on the line, would you stay silent to protect your mission, or would you reveal who you really are? Tell me in the comments, because her silence is about to change everything. The silence broke with a laugh. Sharp, cold, unmistakable. It came from the gate agent, Mark Reynolds, his voice dripping with the confidence of someone who believed he owned the space. "Look, folks," he said loudly enough for the crowd to hear, "if you don't have proper documents, you don't fly. Simple as that." But it wasn't simple, and everyone knew it. The truth was written in the way he leaned on the counter, the way his eyes narrowed only at her, the way his tone sharpened when it was her turn to board. Other passengers had walked through with a smile and a nod, but Angela Carter had been stopped, questioned, and now publicly shamed. And yet, he smiled as though he had done his job well. Passengers whispered behind their phones. Some muttered that maybe she deserved it. Others shook their heads, uncomfortable but unwilling to interfere. Angela stood tall, saying nothing, and in that silence, layers of conflict pressed down on her like weights. The weight of race. She had seen that look before, that smirk, that subtle suggestion that her presence was suspicious, her identity questionable, her right to move freely somehow negotiable. The weight of class. She noticed the first-class passengers ushered through without a word, their boarding passes barely scanned, their mistakes overlooked, their bags forgiven. The weight of gender. She felt the sting of being dismissed, talked over, and cornered in front of strangers who believed a uniform gave him the right to strip her dignity. And the weight of status, because if only they knew who she was, if only they understood the authority she carried, they would realize the man humiliating her was standing on ground far above his reach. But Angela Carter did not reveal it. Not yet. She let the weight press harder. She let the silence grow heavier, because she knew one thing: power only reveals its true face when people believe no one is watching. The crowd shifted again. A teenage boy whispered to his mother, "Why is he doing that? She didn't even argue." The mother hushed him quickly, avoiding the scene, eyes locked on her phone. The smirk on Reynolds's face widened. "You see, ma'am," he said, holding up the shredded passport like evidence, This is what happens when people try to slip past the system. Not today, not at my gate. And then, the words, the ones that cut deeper than paper. People like you don't belong here. The crowd went still. Some sucked in a breath. Others looked away as though pretending not to hear made them less guilty of witnessing it. A few even nodded quietly, their silence an unspoken agreement. Angela's eyes lifted for the first time, meeting his. Her face gave nothing away. No anger, no fear, just the unshakable calm of someone who knew a truth he could never imagine. Because people like her didn't just belong here. They built here. They protected here. They governed the very skies he thought he controlled. But she didn't say that. She only pressed her hand tighter against the envelope hidden beneath her coat. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a man in uniform approaching. A police officer, his expression unreadable. His hand brushed against the radio clipped to his chest. The passengers leaned forward, eager for the next moment. Phones tilted higher. This wasn't just a flight delay anymore. It was a spectacle. And still, Angela said nothing. The officer cleared his throat. His eyes darted from Reynolds to Angela. And then, slowly, his hand shifted toward the cuffs on his belt. The officer's hand hovered by his belt, and the terminal seemed to lean in. Every face told a story. Some looked horrified, some looked entertained, some looked away, pretending nothing was happening, and almost all of them kept recording. The glow of phones lit up the crowd like stars in the night, every angle captured, every breath documented. Some whispered captions into their cameras. Crazy scene at Atlanta airport. She's about to get arrested. Others tapped furiously, streaming live to friends, eager to be the first to share. Angela stood in the center of it all, silent. She was the eye of a storm she had not created. A young woman near the front, jeans, hoodie, earbuds dangling, spoke up. Her voice shook, but it cut through the tension. She didn't even do anything. Why are you treating her like this? The crowd shifted. A few nodded in agreement. A flicker of humanity stirred, but then, just as quickly, it was snuffed out. The airline manager arrived, pressed suit, clipped badge, a voice trained in polite hostility. He didn't ask questions. He didn't review what happened. He didn't even look at Angela. He looked straight at the gate agent and said, "What's the problem here, Mark?" The words were sharp enough to pierce the small flame of defense that had risen for Angela. The message was clear. The company would stand by its own. Reynolds grinned, emboldened, holding up the shredded passport. This passenger attempted to board with suspicious documents. I stopped her before she could slip through. Suspicious. The word hung heavy in the air, weighted with implication. Some in the crowd shook their heads, whispering, "That's not true." But others nodded, muttering, "Figures. They always try something. Kindness, cruelty, hope, betrayal." The emotions in the room swung back and forth, faster than the blinking of a security light. Angela's silence remained unbroken. Her eyes scanned the crowd, lingering not on those who supported her, nor on those who mocked her, but on the ones who looked away, the ones who knew it was wrong but did nothing. Because she understood something most people didn't. Indifference is its own kind of violence. The officer shifted again, closer now, his cuffs glinting under the fluorescent lights. The crowd braced, and just as the first movement of his hand touched the metal clasp, a voice rang out over the intercom. "Security team requested at gate B17. Repeat, security team at gate B17. The officer paused, his radio crackling. His eyes darted to Angela, then to Reynolds, then back again. Something had shifted, but no one in the terminal yet understood just how much. Have you noticed how quickly a crowd can change? One moment silent, the next divided, some ready to defend, others ready to condemn. If you were in that terminal, which side would you be on? Think carefully, because silence is about to meet power. The intercom's metallic voice still echoed as the officer froze mid-motion. His hand lingered near his cuffs, but his eyes told a different story now. Confusion, hesitation, calculation. Across the terminal, the crowd pressed forward, craning necks, lifting phones higher. Whispers spread like wildfire. "They're calling security." "She's gonna get dragged out." "Wait, why this much backup?" The manager adjusted his tie, his jaw tightening. He hadn't called for security. Neither had Reynolds. For the first time, their smug confidence cracked. Angela stayed motionless, her shredded passport still dangling in Reynolds's grip. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was deliberate. She knew silence was the most unnerving weapon, because silence makes others fill the void, and they were filling it with panic. Two new officers arrived, heavy boots striking the tile, radios buzzing against their shoulders. Their presence sent ripples through the terminal, tension climbing higher. One officer, a woman with sharp eyes, name tag reading Sergeant Miller, took immediate command. "Report," she snapped, her voice cutting through the chaos. Reynolds jumped in, quick and eager. "This woman attempted to board with fraudulent documents. I stopped her. She became aggressive. Possible threat to security." His words carried authority, but his tone carried arrogance. The manager nodded, affirming the lie. "We can't allow her to fly until this is resolved." Sergeant Miller turned her gaze to Angela. Her silence, her posture, the calm way she stood, it didn't match the story she'd just heard, and Miller noticed. "Ma'am, do you have anything you want to say?" The crowd fell quiet. Phones zoomed in. Angela's lips parted slightly. Everyone leaned in, waiting for her voice to break the silence. But she shook her head. No words. Miller studied her carefully, then turned to Reynolds. "Where's the passport now?" Reynolds hesitated, then held up the torn pieces like a trophy. "She tried to slip this past me." Miller's brows furrowed. She reached out, took the torn pieces and examined them, the paper quality, the security features, the unmistakable official seals, now marred by rips. Her eyes snapped back to Reynolds. "You destroyed this?" he stammered. It looked fake." But Miller's silence was louder than his excuses. The crowd reacted instantly. Gasps, whispers. One voice shouted, "He ripped it up on purpose!" The balance of power began to tilt. The manager stepped in, voice rising. "Officer, this passenger cannot be allowed to travel until her identity is confirmed. We can't compromise the safety of this flight." It sounded official. It sounded rehearsed. But the unease in his eyes betrayed him. Angela finally raised her head. Her gaze locked with Miller's. No words, just a steady, unblinking stare. It was enough. Miller's grip tightened on the torn passport. The crowd leaned forward, the tension unbearable. And then, Miller spoke 4 words that shifted everything. "This doesn't add up." The crowd erupted. Some cheered. Some shouted accusations at Reynolds. Others demanded answers. The officer with the cuffs stepped back slightly, no longer certain who the suspect was. And in that charged silence, Angela finally whispered her first words of the night. So soft only Miller caught them. So sharp they cut through the entire narrative. "Check the system." Miller froze. Her hand brushed her radio. "What system?" she asked. Angela leaned closer, her words deliberate. "The FAA database." The crowd didn't understand. Not yet, but they would. And when they did, everything would explode. The first crack has appeared. Reynolds isn't as untouchable as he thought. But what happens when the truth hiding in the system comes out? Would you risk your career to protect the truth? Or protect your pride? Comment below, because the next twist will decide everything. Check the system. Angela's words were quiet, but in the silence of the gate, they thundered. The crowd stirred. Confused whispers bounced across the terminal. What system? What's she talking about? Did she just say FAA? Sergeant Miller's hand lingered on her radio. She didn't move yet. She was calculating, testing the weight of the moment. Reynolds scoffed loudly, seizing the pause. She's bluffing. She probably Googled something, trying to sound official. These people do that all the time. He tossed the words like gasoline onto a crowd already on edge. Some nodded, some frowned. Division deepened, but Angela didn't flinch. She didn't even look at Reynolds. Her eyes stayed on Miller, steady, unwavering, like she was speaking only to her. Miller narrowed her eyes. Something about Angela's calm bothered her. Most passengers in this position begged, pleaded, shouted. But this one? She was waiting. The manager cut in, sharp and defensive. "Officer, this is wasting time. She doesn't have valid ID. She can't board. End of discussion." But Miller didn't look at him. She pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered. The crowd leaned closer, hungry for the next move. Angela finally spoke again, her voice low but firm. "Type my name." For the first time, Reynolds laughed. "Her name? She doesn't even have a passport anymore. What's she gonna prove with that?" The crowd laughed nervously with him. Relief at his mockery, fear that it might be true. But Miller didn't laugh. She asked quietly, "What's your name?" Angela hesitated, not out of fear but precision. Every syllable mattered, every breath. Her voice came steady. "Angela Porter." The name dropped like a stone into still water, rippling across the crowd. Ordinary, simple, no titles, no power, just 2 words. But Miller kept typing. Her brow furrowed, her thumb moved faster. Reynolds sneered, "You're really wasting our time with this." And then Miller's radio crackled, a voice cut through static. "Confirming identity. Stand by." The crowd leaned forward. The manager shifted, uneasy. Reynolds's smirk flickered. Miller's eyes scanned her screen, reading something no one else could see. Her lips tightened. "Ma'am," she said, her tone suddenly more formal, "what is your current position of employment?" Angela tilted her head slightly. "You already know the answer." Gasps. Murmurs. The crowd's pulse quickened. The officer who had nearly cuffed her just minutes ago whispered, almost to himself, "What the hell is going on?" But Miller knew. She had confirmation, and it didn't match the story Reynolds tried to sell. Still, Angela said nothing else. She let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating, because the truth wasn't hers to reveal. It was theirs to discover. Reynolds snapped, his voice rising in panic. "She's lying. You can't trust her. Look at her. She's just—" He stopped himself. But the damage was done. The crowd heard it. The unspoken insult, the prejudice dripping beneath his words. Phones recorded every second, every angle, every ugly detail. And Angela? She simply folded her arms, waiting, watching, knowing. Because the system Miller was checking wasn't just any database. It was the one database Reynolds never imagined she could belong to, the one database that, if confirmed, would end his career in a single instant. The FAA Inspector Registry. Her name is in the system. But what happens when a passenger becomes more powerful than the gate agents, the manager, and even the police standing in front of her? Who really holds the sky in their hands? The ones with the uniform, or the one with the truth? Tell me what you think before we uncover the first shocking reversal. The seconds dragged like hours. Sergeant Miller's eyes stayed glued to her screen, her jaw tightening as she scrolled. The crowd leaned in closer, cameras raised, whispers swelling like waves against the terminal walls. Angela said nothing. She didn't need to. Miller looked up at last. Her tone was no longer sharp, no longer suspicious. It was cautious, respectful. "Ma'am," she said slowly, "our system indicates that you are Chief Inspector Angela Porter, Federal Aviation Administration." The words struck like thunder. The terminal erupted, gasps, shouts, disbelief. Phones shook as people scrambled to capture every second. Reynolds's smirk collapsed, his face draining of color. The manager blinked, stammering, That can't be right. That's not possible." Miller held her phone higher, reading aloud. "Current position, Chief Inspector, FAA. Oversight, National Compliance, Safety Enforcement, Operational Audits." The crowd gasped again. Some applauded. Others laughed in shock. A voice shouted, "She outranks all of you!" Reynolds lunged forward, desperate, sweat breaking at his temples. "She's lying! She must have hacked something. People fake credentials online all the time." But Miller cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. "This isn't from a website, Mark. This is a secure federal database. You destroyed the passport of a federal officer." The words "federal officer" rang out like a verdict. The manager stepped back, his tie suddenly suffocating around his neck. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, his corporate rehearsed tone failed him. Angela finally spoke, calm, steady. Her first full sentence of the ordeal: "You've made a mistake that will follow you for the rest of your career." The crowd roared, some in awe, some in disbelief. Phones recorded every syllable. Reynolds panicked, his hands flailed. "She's lying! She tricked us! She... But Miller didn't let him finish. "Enough." The single word sliced the air. Reynolds froze. Miller stepped toward Angela, her posture shifting from authority to deference. "Ma'am, do you want to press charges?" The question sent a ripple through the terminal. Reynolds's jaw dropped. The manager's face turned ghostly pale. The crowd nearly exploded with excitement. Angela, though, said nothing. She just looked around, at the phones, at the officers, at Reynolds's trembling hands. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was judgment. The officer who had nearly cuffed her moments ago whispered again, almost ashamed, "She outranks the FAA inspectors. She could ground an entire airline with one report." The crowd caught it. The weight of those words spread like fire. Angela slowly unfolded her arms. She took one deliberate step closer to Reynolds, not aggressive, not rushed, just enough to make him stumble back. Her voice was calm, almost quiet. "You tore up my passport. Do you know what that means?" Reynolds stuttered. I was just doing my job." Angela's eyes locked on his. "You weren't doing your job. You were playing God." The crowd gasped, hanging on every word. "And now," she added, "the system will decide what happens to you." Miller's radio buzzed again. This time the voice was urgent. "Confirming. Chief Inspector Porter has full federal authority. All personnel stand down immediately." The officers shifted. One even lowered his head slightly, almost like a bow. Reynolds's knees buckled. The manager clutched his tie, his voice breaking. We didn't know." Angela turned slowly toward him. "That's the problem. You never asked." The words weren't shouted, they weren't dramatic, but they cut deeper than any scream could. The crowd erupted again, this time with cheers, applause, whistles. The balance of power had completely flipped. But Angela didn't smile, she didn't celebrate. She simply turned her gaze back to the crowd of phones, the hundreds of watching eyes. And then, with a voice as steady as steel, she said one more line. "Keep recording. The truth is out. Angela Porter isn't just a passenger. She's the Chief FAA Inspector, and every second is being recorded for the world to see." But here's the real question. What happens when federal power collides with corporate arrogance? Should she forgive, or should she make an example of them? Drop your thoughts below, because the next move could end careers. The terminal was no longer an airport gate. It was an arena. Every eye locked on Angela. Every phone pointed at her like 1,000 glowing spotlights. The applause faded into a charged silence, the kind of silence that begged for the next move. Reynolds staggered back against the counter, sweat pooling at his temples. His voice cracked. She set me up. This whole thing, it's entrapment." The crowd hissed. Boos erupted. A woman near the back shouted, "You ripped up her passport because she's black. We all saw it." Others joined in. He treated her like trash. "Lock him up. Justice for Angela." The weight of public opinion had shifted. The same crowd that once stood frozen was now chanting for accountability. The manager, pale and trembling, raised his hands, his corporate mask crumbling. "Please, everyone, this is a misunderstanding. We We didn't realize who she was. Angela turned her gaze on him, calm, controlled. And if I weren't who I am? The manager froze. The question echoed like a hammer against stone. The crowd went silent again. Angela stepped forward, her voice steady, her eyes unblinking. If I were just another passenger, without a title, without federal authority, would you have destroyed my life with the same ease you destroyed my passport? The question cut deep. No one answered. Because everyone knew the truth. Even Sergeant Miller, steady as she was, shifted uncomfortably. The silence wasn't just about Angela anymore, it was about them, about the system. Angela let the silence linger. Then, with precision, she dropped another blow. You didn't misjudge me because you thought I was suspicious. You misjudged me because you thought I was powerless. The crowd erupted again. Cheers, whistles, applause. Phones shook as people shouted her words live to thousands watching online. The manager tried again, desperate. Ms. Inspector Porter, please, if you'll just allow us to fix this. Angela's eyes narrowed. You can't fix what you don't understand. Reynolds slammed his fist against the counter, his panic spilling into rage. She's turning this into a circus. She's making me look like a racist in front of everyone. The crowd roared back. You are racist! Accountability! Fire him! Reynolds shrank under the noise, his voice swallowed by a wave he could no longer control. Angela raised her hand, and the crowd hushed. Her command over the room wasn't loud. It was absolute. Her tone softened, but her words carried steel. This isn't just about me. This is about every traveler who walks through these doors hoping to be treated with dignity. Every mother, every father, every child, every voice that's been silenced because people like you thought no one would hold you accountable. The cheers were thunderous now. Some people had tears in their eyes, but Angela didn't smile. Instead, she pointed at the manager. You wanted silence. You wanted submission. What you got was exposure. The manager's phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He pulled it out, hands shaking. His eyes widened as he read the screen, then another buzz, and another. Corporate headquarters was watching. The live feeds had already gone viral. The story was no longer local, it was national. Angela stepped back, her posture calm, her gaze scanning the crowd once more. You're recording? She asked. The crowd shouted back as one. Yes! Good, she replied, her voice like ice. Don't stop. For a moment, silence reclaimed the space. It was the kind of silence heavy with realization. This wasn't over. This was only beginning. And then, another voice joined, a stranger's voice cutting through the noise. Miss Porter, what are you going to do now? The question hung in the air. The crowd waited. The cameras zoomed in. Angela's eyes flickered, her face unreadable. For the first time, uncertainty passed like a shadow across her calm. She didn't answer, not yet. Because some answers are too dangerous to give away too soon. The system has been exposed, the crowd is demanding justice, and Angela Porter holds all the power. But what should she do with it? Forgive or destroy? Protect the system or burn it down? If you were in her shoes, what choice would you make? The manager's phone buzzed again, harder this time, rattling in his trembling hands. He stepped back, eyes darting between Angela and the glowing screen. He swallowed, pale. They're watching, he muttered. Reynolds blinked. Who's watching? The manager's voice cracked. Corporate, headquarters, they're on the line. The crowd gasped, the energy shifting. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore, this was national. Angela tilted her head, her calm unbroken. Put it on speaker. The manager froze. I can't. Angela's voice sharpened. You will. Her authority wasn't shouted, it was absolute. Shaking, the manager tapped his phone and set it on the counter. A cold, polished voice filled the terminal. This is Linda Reyes, Senior Counsel for Horizon Air. Who am I speaking to? The crowd leaned in. Phones zoomed closer. Angela stepped forward. Angela Porter, Chief FAA Inspector. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, Chief Porter, the voice replied, suddenly cautious. We're not aware of your presence. Angela's eyes narrowed. That's the problem. The crowd roared with approval. Cheers, whistles. The corporate lawyer's voice nearly drowned under it. Reynolds slammed his hand on the counter, desperate to claw back control. She's lying. She tricked you all. But the lawyer cut him off. Mr. Reynolds, stop speaking. Immediately. The look on Reynolds' face was priceless. Panic, betrayal, disbelief. Even his own company had abandoned him. Angela didn't smile. She stayed steady, calm, unyielding. You have a problem in your company, she said evenly. It isn't just incompetence, it's culture. And tonight the world is watching it unfold live. Phones captured every word. Some in the crowd whispered updates to unseen viewers, their live stream chats exploding. The lawyer's voice hardened. Chief Porter, we assure you this matter will be handled internally. Angela cut in. No, not internally, not quietly, not the way you've buried countless complaints before. This time, it's in the open. The crowd erupted. Yes! The sound rattling the glass walls of the terminal. Reynolds trembled, muttering under his breath. This isn't fair. This isn't how it's supposed to go. Angela turned, her voice suddenly louder, addressing the crowd. Tell me, how many of you have ever been humiliated at an airport? Hands shot up everywhere. Dozens, hundreds. Voices shouted stories. Made me throw away my medicine. Called me out in front of everyone. They ripped up my ticket and left me stranded. The terminal shook with testimony. Angela let it build. Then, slowly, she raised her hand. Silence returned, thick and heavy. Her eyes went back to the phone. You can't silence them anymore. The system will answer. The lawyer's voice cracked slightly now, no longer polished. Chief Porter, what is it you want? Angela's response was cold, precise. Accountability. The single word echoed, vibrating through the crowd, through the officers, through every phone recording. The lawyer hesitated, the weight of millions of unseen eyes pressing against her. Chief Porter, please, let's not escalate further. This could damage the entire airline. Angela stepped closer to the phone, her voice sharp enough to slice glass. You should have thought of that before your employee destroyed my passport, before your manager defended it, before you decided silence was safer than change. The crowd roared again. Accountability! Accountability! The chant grew louder, shaking the air itself. Reynolds covered his ears, his face red, his lips trembling. The manager stared at the floor, broken. Angela turned, her gaze sweeping across the crowd, then back to the phone. You want to contain this. I won't let you, because this isn't about a single passport. This is about power, and who gets crushed beneath it when no one is watching. The lawyer said nothing. Silence. And Angela? She let that silence stand, because sometimes silence isn't emptiness. It's judgment. The chant still thundered across the terminal. Accountability! 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 Every voice in unison, shaking the steel beams above their heads. Angela didn't move, didn't flinch. She stood at the counter, the corporate lawyer's voice trapped inside the small speaker of a phone, suddenly too fragile to contain the weight of this moment. The lawyer tried again. Chief Porter, we understand your frustrations. Angela cut in, sharp as a blade. No, don't call this frustration. Frustration is when you lose your luggage. This is systemic humiliation, and it ends tonight. The crowd erupted again. Phones went higher. Even the airport police officers, once ready to haul her away, now stood frozen, waiting. Angela turned, not to the lawyer on the phone, not to Reynolds, not even to the broken manager, but to the passengers around her. You've seen it. You've lived it. Tell them what you've been forced to accept. And then, like floodgates breaking, the stories poured out. A man in a business suit shouted, They stranded me overnight with no food voucher. A mother lifted her toddler high. They screamed at me while my baby was crying in my arms. Another voice. I was denied boarding because of my accent. Dozens of testimonies shouted into the air, into live streams, into history itself. Angela didn't stop them. She let it roll, let it drown out every excuse the corporate lawyer might have rehearsed. The weight of lived pain filled the terminal, each voice another nail in the coffin of silence. Finally, Angela raised her hand. The noise fell quiet, but the power didn't vanish. It simmered, heavy, waiting for direction. She leaned toward the phone. Do you hear them? Silence. Then softly, yes. Angela's eyes narrowed. Then act. Not tomorrow, not in a press release. Act here, act now. The lawyer stammered. Chief Porter, that's not how these processes work. Angela's voice cut like thunder. Processes? The ones designed to bury the truth under paperwork? The ones that grind victims down until they give up? Those processes? The crowd shouted, Yeah! The lawyer's voice faltered. Please, Chief Porter. We can arrange a closed-door meeting. Angela slammed her hand on the counter. No more closed doors, no more secrecy. Tonight, you answer publicly. The roar that followed was deafening. The walls shook. People stood on chairs waving phones like torches. Reynolds collapsed into the nearest seat, whispering, This can't be happening. Angela pointed at the phone. Say it, right here, on record, in front of every witness. Do you take responsibility for what your employees did tonight? Silence. The lawyer tried to wriggle out. We acknowledge that mistakes were made. Angela cut her off instantly. No, not mistakes. Abuse. Say the word. The crowd picked it up. Say it, say it, say it. The lawyer's breathing trembled through the speaker. She was no longer in control. The narrative had slipped. The crowd wasn't just listening, they were demanding. Finally, her voice cracked under the weight. We take responsibility. The terminal exploded. Cheers, claps, chants, tears. Strangers hugged strangers. The very air shook with release. But Angela wasn't finished. Then you will do more than speak. You will act. Effective immediately, your employee, she pointed at Reynolds, is suspended pending investigation. The lawyer hesitated. That isn't protocol. Angela's voice thundered. This isn't protocol anymore. This is justice. The crowd screamed in agreement. The lawyer's sigh cracked over the speaker. Effective immediately, Mr. Reynolds is suspended. Reynolds' head shot up, his face draining of all color. You can't. I've worked here 15 years. You can't throw me away like this. But the crowd drowned him out with chants. Justice! 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 Angela didn't soften. She didn't gloat. She simply turned back to the phone. And the manager? The manager's head dropped. He already knew. The lawyer hesitated again. He is suspended as well. The crowd roared again. For the first time, Angela allowed herself a breath. Not relief, not victory, but a breath. Because this wasn't over. It had only begun. She leaned toward the phone one last time. And Horizon Air, starting tomorrow, I'll be inside your headquarters, with a team, with cameras. We'll see just how deep this rot goes. You wanted silence. Instead, you've earned inspection. The lawyer's voice trembled. Yes, Chief Porter. Angela picked up the phone, ended the call, and laid it flat on the counter. The terminal was electric. Strangers cheered her name. Phones streamed her face across the world. But she didn't raise her arms in triumph. She didn't bask in the attention. She looked at the broken passport on the counter, its torn pieces still scattered like evidence of a wound. Her voice, low but strong, carried over the chaos. This isn't just about me. It's about every single person who has been treated like less. And tonight, you all proved that silence is over. The terminal thundered with applause. And yet, even as the cheers rose, a shadow remained. Because Angela knew, corporate battles weren't won in terminals. They were waged in boardrooms, in courts, in back rooms dripping with influence. Tonight was victory. Tomorrow would be war. Angela Porter just forced a billion-dollar corporation to bend in public. But have you ever wondered, what happens when the cameras are gone and power retreats behind closed doors again? Should Angela keep pressing forward, or has she just awakened something even bigger? Let me know what you think in the comments below. By the next morning, Angela's face was everywhere, not just on the phones of passengers who had streamed her midnight stand, not just on social media hashtags that burned hotter than breaking news. She was on CNN, on Fox, on MSNBC. Local channels in Chicago ran the clip on repeat. Gate agent rips passenger's passport. Passenger revealed as Chief FAA Inspector. It was a story too sharp, too shocking, too symbolic to ignore. Angela had barely slept. She hadn't even gone home. She had been ushered through the night by federal colleagues into a quiet office inside O'Hare, shielded from reporters who now swarmed the terminals like vultures. But no wall of silence could contain what was coming. By noon, the narrative had split. Some anchors called her a hero, a voice for the voiceless, a woman who turned humiliation into justice. But others? They painted her as something else. An abuse of power, one commentator said. She used her position to stage a spectacle, another accused. She's a radical, making the airlines bend to her political agenda. Clips were cut, context twisted. Her demand for justice was replayed without the crowd's voices. Her anger was looped, framed as intimidation. Angela sat in the office, head in her hands, as her assistant Maya slid a tablet toward her. "You need to see this." Angela lifted her eyes. The screen showed Senator Howard Greaves, a polished, silver-haired politician with an easy smile and a reputation for being the airline industry's loudest defender. He was on live TV. This so-called inspector turned a minor customer service issue into a witch hunt. She embarrassed hard-working staff and humiliated Horizon Air in front of the nation. This isn't accountability, it's theatrics. And I promise Congress will investigate her before they investigate anyone else. Angela's fists tightened. Maya's voice was low. "He's already drafting a letter to the FAA board. They're calling for your suspension pending review." The word cut like ice. Suspension. Angela had fought her entire career to reach this role, climbing through a maze of quiet bias, closed doors, and whispered doubts. And now, because she had refused to stay silent, they wanted to strip her badge. She stood, pacing. "They're trying to turn me into the villain." Maya nodded grimly. "And they have the money and the networks to do it." Angela looked out the window. Reporters gathered at the fence, shouting questions to any passing employee. Signs already appeared. Justice for Angela, boycott Horizon, but also, fire the inspector, stop the witch hunt. The firestorm wasn't just about her. It was pulling the country into a storm of division. And then, her phone buzzed, a blocked number. She hesitated before answering. "Porter." The voice on the other end was familiar, too familiar. Well, looks like you finally got their attention." Angela froze. It was Victor Hale, a former FAA official, a man she once trusted, a man forced out after whispers of corruption and secret deals with airline lobbyists. His voice carried a smile. "You think you've exposed them? Angela, you've barely scratched the surface. Horizon is nothing compared to what's really hiding in those contracts. But now, thanks to your little performance, the whole world is watching, and that makes you dangerous." Angela's heart pounded. "What do you want, Victor?" He chuckled. "I want nothing. I'm just reminding you, they don't forgive people who threaten their bottom line. You've awakened them, and they'll come for you harder than you think." The line went dead. Angela stood frozen, the weight of his warning pressing down like iron. Maya's voice broke the silence. "Who was that?" Angela shook her head slowly. "Someone who knows too much." She looked back at the TV. Senator Greaves smiled into the camera, promising hearings, investigations, inquiries. Angela's stomach turned. not with fear, but with resolve. If they wanted war, she would give them war. But even as she whispered the words under her breath, a darker question clawed its way into her mind. Had Victor just given her a warning or a threat? Angela Porter is now the center of a national storm, praised as a hero, condemned as a villain, and warned by a disgraced insider that something even bigger is at play. But is Victor trying to help her or set her up? And more importantly, would you still push forward if you knew powerful enemies were circling? Let me know in the comments. The following evening, Angela walked into the FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C. The building loomed like a fortress of glass and steel, but tonight it felt more like a cage. The security guard at the front desk hesitated before nodding her through. That pause was enough to sting, her badge still scanned, but whispers had already reached the lower ranks. Maya followed close behind. Half the staff watched your clip live. The other half saw it on the morning news. They know you're the story now. Angela didn't reply. She pushed open the door to the conference room where the board had gathered. 7 members sat around the long mahogany table, suits crisp, faces sharp, expressions unreadable. Chairwoman Daniels, a woman with ice-gray hair and an expression that had cut down dozens of inspectors before Angela, cleared her throat. "Chief Porter, please sit." Angela remained standing. "Before you begin, I need to know something. Who leaked the internal memo?" Daniel's eyebrow arched. "Excuse me?" Angela pulled a folded newspaper from her bag and slapped it on the table. The headline screamed, "FAA Inspector accused of abusing authority at O'Hare incident." Below it, direct quotes from a confidential FAA internal review, details only board members could have accessed. Angela's voice was steel. "This was leaked less than 12 hours after our closed-door session yesterday. That means someone in this room is feeding information to the press." A low murmur rippled through the table. Daniels tapped her pen once, measured. "Angela, this is not the way to conduct yourself." "No," Angela snapped. "This isn't conduct. This is sabotage. And I want to know who in this agency is working with Senator Greaves and Horizon Air to bury me." Maya shifted uneasily behind her. One of the board members, a man in his 50s named Clark, leaned forward. "You're out of line. This isn't about you. It's about the reputation of this agency. You turned a gate incident into a national crisis, and now you've made yourself a liability." The word stung. Liability. Angela's fists clenched. A liability? For exposing abuse? For demanding accountability? If that makes me a liability, then maybe this agency is the problem. The room went ice cold. Daniels's gaze sharpened. "Careful, Chief Porter. Your passion is admirable, but your tone borders on insubordination. Remember, you serve at the discretion of this board." For the first time in years, Angela felt the ground beneath her shake. She had always believed the FAA board was flawed, but ultimately fair. Tonight, that illusion cracked. She scanned the faces around the table. Clark wouldn't meet her eyes. Daniel's expression was unreadable. Another member, a younger woman, Patel, shifted uncomfortably, as though she knew more than she dared to say. And then Angela saw it. A folder, slightly ajar, on Clark's side of the table. Inside, a stamped letterhead from Greaves's office. Her stomach dropped. Clark caught her glance and snapped the folder shut, but it was too late. She had seen enough. Angela's voice cut through the silence. "So it's true? At least one of you is colluding with the senator to remove me." The air froze. No one denied it. No one confirmed it. Daniels finally spoke. "We will convene an emergency vote in 72 hours. Until then, Chief Porter, you remain under review. Do not speak to the press. Do not make further public appearances. And most importantly, do not interfere with Horizon Air's internal affairs until this board decides your future." Angela's chest tightened. They were boxing her in. She leaned forward, her voice low, deadly calm. "If you think I'm going to disappear quietly, you're mistaken. You can leak your memos, you can smear my name, But I promise you this, if I fall, I will not fall alone." A hush fell. Clark's jaw tightened. Daniel's fingers stilled on her pen. Patel lowered her eyes, but a flicker of guilt betrayed her. Angela turned and walked out without another word, Maya at her side. In the hallway, Maya whispered, "They're trying to cut your legs out. They want you out before you uncover something bigger." Angela stopped, her voice a whisper filled with fire. "Then we find it before they bury me." But even as she said the words, the reality pressed in. The betrayal wasn't just from airlines or politicians or media. It was inside her own agency, and the enemy who wanted her silenced was sitting at the same table where she once believed justice lived. Angela just discovered that the real betrayal isn't just outside, it's inside the FAA itself. Someone she works with is feeding her enemies. But who? Clark, Daniels, or even Patel? And more importantly, how do you fight corruption when it wears the same badge you do? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know who you think the traitor is. Angela left headquarters that night under a swarm of camera flashes. Reporters shouted questions. Are you being suspended? Do you regret your actions? Are you still the face of FAA accountability? She kept walking, head high, though every word hit like a stone. But when the car door shut and the noise fell away, her chest finally loosened. She exhaled. Maya, driving, glanced at her. They're circling. If you stay visible, they'll finish you. Angela nodded slowly. Then we go invisible. That was the moment Angela Porter, the public face of the FAA, disappeared into the shadows. For the next week, she stripped her routine bare. No press conferences, no interviews, no appearances in the glass offices of headquarters. Instead, she worked in quiet corners of Washington libraries, in coffee shops near the river, in a borrowed apartment on the south side where no journalist would think to look. Her tools were simple: a laptop, a secure line, and a network of old contacts she hadn't called in years. One of them was Detective Marcus Rowe, a Chicago cop with 25 years in organized crime investigations, a man who owed her a favor. When he picked up the phone, his voice was rough. "Porter, heard you started a war." Angela's tone was calm. "Not started, exposed." Rowe chuckled. "And now you need dirt." "Not dirt," Angela corrected. "Truth. Horizon Air isn't just about a torn passport. Clark, one of my own board members, has been exchanging files with Senator Greaves. I need proof of what they're hiding." There was a pause. Then Rowe's voice dropped. "You know, once you dig, you won't just find corruption. You'll find the people willing to bury anyone who threatens it." Angela's jaw tightened. "Then let's find them before they bury me." The next 48 hours were a blur of hushed meetings. Angela met Rowe in the back booth of a dim diner on Chicago's west side, the kind of place where the coffee was burnt, the blinds were cracked, and nobody looked twice at two people speaking quietly. Rowe slid a manila envelope across the table. "Corporate filings, campaign donations, lobby contracts. All roads lead back to Greaves, and Horizon Air isn't their only benefactor. They've funneled millions into silencing labor complaints, safety violations, even crash investigations, all covered, all buried." Angela flipped through the documents, her heart pounding with each page. She whispered, "They're not just covering racism, they're covering crimes that put lives at risk." Rowe nodded. "And Clark's name shows up in the paperwork, consulting fees, off-book payments. The guy isn't just leaking, he's on their payroll." Angela's stomach turned. The betrayal had a price tag. She closed the folder, her eyes blazing. "This is it. This is what I needed." Rowe leaned back, arms crossed. "Careful, Porter. Information like this doesn't just get people fired, it gets people followed, watched, and worse." Angela met his gaze without blinking. "Then let them follow. Let them watch. Because when this breaks, they'll have nowhere left to hide." That night, back in the apartment, Maya paced while Angela spread the papers across the floor. "You realize what this means?" Maya whispered. "You're not just going after Horizon. You're going after Greaves, a sitting senator, and Clark, your own board member. This is a suicide mission." Angela's voice was quiet but steady. "It's justice, and it's bigger than me." Maya stopped pacing, watching her. For the first time, Angela saw fear in her assistant's eyes, not fear of the enemies outside, but of what Angela was willing to risk. Still, Maya whispered, "Then we have to move fast, before they find us first." Angela didn't respond. She gathered the papers, slid them into a new envelope, and pressed her hand flat against it. This wasn't just evidence. It was a weapon. And in the silence of that dim apartment, she made a vow. They thought they could break me at the gate. They thought they could smear me in the press. They thought they could betray me from inside. But now, I'm coming for them all. Angela Porter just uncovered the link. Board members in her own agency secretly paid by Horizon Air and protected by Senator Greaves. But now that she holds the proof, the real question is, can she survive long enough to use it? If you were Angela, would you go public right away, or wait until you had every piece of the puzzle? Drop your answer in the comments.